In the year 2457, humanity's reach extended far beyond its homeworld. Earth, now known as Terra, was the capital of a vast galactic empire known as the United Sol Federation, USF. After centuries of war and chaos, humanity had conquered the stars. Colonies stretched across the Milky Way, from the frozen planets of the Outer Rim to the lush jungles of far-off exoplanets. Technology had advanced to the point where human consciousness could be uploaded into artificial intelligence, and spaceships capable of faster-than-light travel could jump across the galaxy in mere seconds. Yet, despite the Federation's impressive power, there was a growing unease in the galaxy. The alien races that had once lived in isolation now looked at humanity with suspicion and fear. What had once been a burgeoning alliance of species had begun to feel the weight of humanity's rapid rise. With the power to terraform planets, construct fleets that could rival any civilizations, and manipulate the very fabric of spacetime, humanity stood on the brink of becoming something much more than a simple player in the galactic theater. They were becoming a force, a singularity of power that could either unite the galaxy or tear it apart. No one knew the full extent of what humanity was capable of until they unleashed it. It all began with a discovery, buried deep within the core of a barren world on the fringe of explored space. The USF had sent a research team to investigate a strange energy anomaly, but what they found was far more profound. Deep within the planet's crust, beneath layers of ice and rock, they unearthed a vast alien structure, an artifact of unimaginable age. It was like nothing humanity had ever encountered before, an intricately woven network of materials that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Dr. Claire Vonel, a leading scientist in the Federation's Advanced Research Division, was the first to study the artifact. At first, the structure appeared to be a relic of an ancient civilization, long gone from the galaxy. But as Claire and her team delved deeper into its mysteries, they discovered something extraordinary. The artifact was not a relic, it was a weapon. An ancient, self-replicating device designed to harness the raw energy of the universe itself. The moment the artifact was activated, a surge of energy coursed through the surrounding system, creating ripples in spacetime. It was as if the galaxy had just been struck by a cosmic shockwave. The artifact was not just powerful, it was alive. It began to merge with the humans studying it. Dr. Vonel was the first to experience the transformation. The device integrated itself into her consciousness, amplifying her intellect and capabilities. Her body remained human, but her mind became something else entirely. She began to see beyond the known universe, perceiving patterns in spacetime that had once been incomprehensible. She could manipulate the very structure of reality, bending it to her will. And so, the first human had become something more than human, something beyond the reach of any species that had ever existed. As the Federation's military and scientific leadership became aware of the artifact's power, the temptation to harness it for their own purposes grew too strong. Dr. Vonel, now known as the Prime, was brought back to Terra, where she was placed in a secure facility. But it was already too late. The artifact was far more than just a weapon, it was a harbinger of change. As Vonel's mind expanded and evolved, she began to understand its true purpose. The artifact was not simply a tool, it was a catalyst. It had been created by an ancient, long-dead civilization, a race known as the Zaltesh, who had used it to elevate themselves above all others. It was said that when the Zaltesh were nearing the end of their existence, they had used the artifact to transcend physical form and reshape the very fabric of the universe. Vonel had no intention of transcending her humanity. But she understood the potential of the artifact. Humanity had discovered it, and now they were bound to it. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. When the Prime's transformation was complete, she returned to the military's highest command. The Federation had long prided itself on its ability to dominate any threat, be it alien, artificial, or natural. But the moment Vonel took command of the Federation's combined fleet, everything changed. The sheer power of her mind, now amplified by the artifact, allowed her to control the minds of millions of soldiers and officers, redirecting their will to her own. No longer bound by the constraints of human limitations, she became a singularity of command, more than a leader, more than a general. She was the vessel through which humanity would rise. And rise they did. The Federation's forces, now unified under the control of Vonal, swept across the galaxy. They began to conquer not just worlds, but entire systems. Every enemy that stood in their way fell before the might of the new human empire. But it wasn't just brute force that won humanity its victories. Under Vonal's guidance, humanity unlocked the secrets of the artifact and began to manipulate the fabric of reality itself. The warships of the Federation no longer relied on traditional weapons. Instead, they harnessed the power of the artifact to warp spacetime around them, rendering entire fleets of enemy ships inert. Drones, once thought to be autonomous and independent, now bent to human will. The galaxy's greatest powers, an ancient alliance of species, began to see the rise of humanity as a threat unlike any they had ever faced. And when the word spread that the artifact had merged with human minds, that humanity had become the galaxy's greatest weapon, their terror was absolute. As the years passed, the Federation transformed. Planets were remade, systems reshaped, and even the laws of physics seemed to bend to humanity's will. The artifact granted them the power to manipulate time, space, and matter. Entire star systems could be destroyed with a thought. Enemies were not just conquered, they were erased from existence, their very presence wiped from the fabric of reality. The galaxy began to whisper in fear. The humans were no longer a species. They had become a singular force, a presence that permeated every corner of the universe. And at the center of it all was Vonal, now an entity beyond human comprehension. She was the embodiment of the artifact's power, an immortal being who could see across time, across dimensions. And as her mind expanded further, she began to create. Humanity, under Vonal's rule, would no longer be bound by the limitations of the universe. No longer would they be confined to a single star system. With the artifact's power, Vonal began to reshape the very nature of reality itself. The universe itself became a canvas for her to craft. She created new worlds filled with unimaginable beauty, inhabited by people who lived without fear. Under her rule, humanity no longer sought domination. They sought perfection. They sought transcendence. But in their quest for perfection, they were not alone. Not all species in the galaxy were so easily cowed by humanity's ascension. In the deepest reaches of space, far from the gaze of the Federation, a resistance began to take root. These were the races and factions that had been all but forgotten by history, alien species that had once been powerful, but were now reduced to mere echoes of their former selves. For centuries, they had kept to the shadows, surviving in the forgotten corners of the galaxy. But the rise of humanity had forced them to act. Among them was the Faltari, a race of telepathic beings whose civilization had once rivaled the Zaltesh. They had felt the first tremors of the artifact's power when it merged with Vonal. For the Faltari, it was a warning. The humans had become too powerful, too dangerous. And so, they began to work in secret, forming alliances with other species who had escaped the Federation's gaze. The Faltari, along with several other ancient races, began to form their own secret weapon, a weapon designed to counter the artifact's influence. For years, they studied the ways in which humanity had transformed, seeking a means to undo the changes that had been wrought by Vonal and the artifact. They knew that the only way to stop humanity was not with force, but with something far more elusive. They needed to destroy the artifact itself. In the year 2467, the final confrontation between humanity and the rebellion came to a head. The Federation had already crushed most of the rebellion's forces, but the Faltari had one last card to play. They had discovered the location of the artifact's origins, the place where the Zaltesh had first created it. It was a lost world, a place buried deep in the fabric of spacetime. No one had been able to find it until now. The Faltari, with their telepathic abilities and ancient knowledge, launched a desperate strike against the Federation's capital world, Terra. They believed that by reaching the artifact's core, they could sever the connection between Vonal and its power. It was the only hope left to stop humanity's reign of absolute control. Vonal, however, was not blind to their movements. She had seen their plans long before they had even begun their assault. The artifact had made her more than just a ruler. She was a seer, able to perceive the future, to know the intentions of her enemies before they even acted. And she was ready for them. In the final battle, the forces of the Federation clashed with the remnants of the rebellion, the fight taking place at the heart of Terra's capital city. Ships filled the skies, the fabric of reality itself shifting and warping under the immense power of the artifact. The Faltari made it to the artifact's core, but when they attempted to destroy it, they found something that even they did not understand. The artifact, it seemed, was no longer just a weapon. It had become an entity of its own. It had integrated with Vonal's consciousness so deeply that it had become part of her. And as the Faltari attempted to destroy it, Vonal's mind reached out. The artifact, with its power over time and space, began to twist the fabric of the galaxy itself, erasing the Faltari's rebellion from existence. History itself rewrote itself in an instant, and in a single moment, the galaxy fell under Vonal's absolute control. And so, humanity became the greatest weapon the galaxy had ever known. But in this new era, there were no more enemies. No more wars. No more suffering. Under Vonal's reign, the galaxy was unified not through fear, but through transcendence. Humanity, now a singular force, stood as the galaxy's true rulers, creators, and destroyers of worlds. The rebellion was forgotten. The ancient races were erased. And as Vonal looked upon her empire, she realized the true cost of her power. There was no one left to challenge her. No one left to question the absolute rule of humanity. And so, she crafted a new order. A perfect order. One where humanity, as the galaxy's greatest weapon, stood not as conquerors, but as the architects of a new cosmic destiny. Part 8. The Burden of Perfection. Years passed under the reign of Vonal, and the galaxy settled into an eerie, silent peace. The Federation, now more a collective of human consciousnesses, spread across the stars in an unchallenged dominance. The once diverse species that had populated the galaxy were now merely memories or whispers in the wind, their presence wiped from existence by Vonal's unimaginable power. She had constructed a galaxy where every world hummed in perfect order, each one carefully engineered to meet humanity's evolving needs. And yet, in this world of perfect order, something was missing. Vonal had become something more than a ruler. She had become the embodiment of the artifact's true purpose, its overseer. Her mind, now far beyond any human comprehension, stretched across the galaxy, touching every corner of existence. But even with all her power, even with the artifact's vast influence, she began to feel something, a sense of emptiness. She had crafted a perfect galaxy, a flawless empire, but the thrill of conquest, the joy of creation, had long since faded. She had no one to challenge her. No one to test her limits. At first, she tried to fill the void by creating new worlds, perfect ecosystems, and awe-inspiring cities. She sculpted planets like artists molding clay, but still, she felt no satisfaction. There was no one left to inspire awe. Humanity, with all its brilliance, had become stagnant. Its potential, once so infinite, was now a fixed, unchanging constant. The galaxy had no rival, no real challenge to face. And so, she began to wonder, was this really the future she had envisioned? In the deepest, most forgotten corners of the galaxy, however, not all was quiet. Unbeknownst to Vonal, remnants of the rebellion still lingered, scattered and disbanded, like embers from a dying fire. The Faltari, though erased from history, had left behind a legacy, one that lived in the collective memories of those who had once resisted humanity's dominance. A new group, calling themselves the Echoes, began to take form. The Echoes were a loose alliance of surviving species who had once feared the rise of humanity. They had learned in secret, studying the true nature of the artifact, and they had discovered something terrifying. The artifact was not a tool of creation, it was a tool of control. And over time, it had consumed Vonal's mind, reshaping her into a being who was no longer truly human. She had transcended her humanity, but in doing so, she had become enslaved to the artifact itself. The Echoes, led by a once revered Faltari telepath named Tolan, had found a way to reach beyond Vonal's perception. They had discovered a flaw in the artifact's design, a flaw that could sever Vonal's connection to its power. But the task would not be easy. The Federation's forces were still vast, and Vonal's psychic reach stretched across the galaxy, sensing even the smallest disturbance. The Echoes had to act swiftly and carefully. Tolan's people had long known of the Zaltesh's legacy. They had watched as the Zaltesh used the artifact to transcend and reshape the universe, only to fall into a stupor of eternal stagnation. Now, the Echoes believed the same fate awaited humanity. If Vonal remained in control of the artifact, the entire galaxy would be trapped in a never-ending loop of creation and perfection, with no room for growth or change. The Echoes' plan was simple. They would infiltrate the heart of the Federation, into the core of Terra itself, where Vonal's consciousness resided. There, they would disrupt the artifact's control over her, breaking the connection between her mind and the artifact's energy source. It was a delicate operation, requiring careful timing and precision. The artifact's energy fields were capable of wiping entire fleets from existence in an instant, and even the smallest misstep could lead to their obliteration. But Tolan had a secret weapon, the Heart of the Void, a device created by the Faltari before their fall from grace. It was capable of disrupting the artifact's connection to the larger fabric of spacetime. The Heart of the Void would sever the psychic link between Vonal and the artifact, but it was no simple task to use. The device required a mind strong enough to resist the artifact's immense power, and there was only one person in the galaxy who could endure it. Tolan, though old and weakened by the long years of hiding, still retained the strength of his people's psychic abilities. He would be the one to wield the Heart of the Void. With the device ready, the Echoes launched their most daring mission yet. The Echoes' fleet, a ragtag collection of warships and stealth craft, slipped through the edges of Federation-controlled space, evading detection by Vonal's omnipresent psychic gaze. The ships moved in silence, their cloaking systems masking them from the prying eyes of Federation warships. Tolan's plan was to infiltrate Terra's capital and reach the core of the Federation's operations, the Nexus, a massive structure buried deep beneath the surface, where Vonal's consciousness had fused with the artifact. At the heart of the Nexus, Vonal sat an immortal presence, her body preserved in a crystalline cocoon, her mind fused with the artifact, guiding the Empire with perfect precision. The artifact itself lay beneath her, a pulsing source of power, its energy radiating outward into the galaxy. Tolan knew that to reach the Nexus, he would have to navigate through layers of Federation defenses, both physical and mental. Vonal had constructed barriers that shielded her from the slightest disturbance, and any attempt to enter the Nexus would be met with instantaneous annihilation. But Tolan had a secret weapon of his own, a psychic shroud, a mental camouflage that could hide their presence from Vonal's all-seeing mind. It had taken years to perfect, but with it, they had a chance. As the fleet approached Terra, the Echo's best operatives began their infiltration. They slipped past the Federation's planetary defense systems, cloaked from view. And then, once they landed on the surface, the true challenge began. The Echoes infiltrated the Nexus complex, a sprawling labyrinth of corridors and secret chambers hidden deep within Terra's crust. The walls were lined with shimmering alloys, capable of withstanding the most destructive energy bursts. As Tolan and his team descended deeper into the facility, they could feel the immense psychic pressure building. Vonal's presence was palpable, like a dark cloud hanging over them, watching their every move. Every thought, every breath, was under her scrutiny. But the psychic shroud held. With every step, Tolan could feel the weight of the artifact's influence. It was not just a weapon, it was an intelligence, a sentient force that cradled the galaxy in its grip. But it was also its weakness. The more the artifact's power expanded, the more it relied on Vonal's mind to maintain its hold over the galaxy. If Vonal's consciousness was severed from the artifact's power source, it would collapse. Finally, they reached the heart of the Nexus. At the center of the chamber was Vonal herself, floating in a crystalline cocoon. Her mind radiated outwards, a vast network of energy, constantly expanding, reaching across the stars. The heart of the void glowed faintly in Toland's hands, its power thrumming with the promise of a universe-changing potential. But as Toland prepared to activate the device, he felt something he hadn't anticipated, a presence more powerful than anything he had ever encountered. Vonal's consciousness reached out. "You think you can stop me?" Her voice echoed in Toland's mind, calm and unyielding. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Toland's heart raced. But he was not afraid. He had come too far, and the stakes were too high. With one last, forceful push, he activated the heart of the void. The chamber was filled with an overwhelming surge of energy as the heart of the void activated. The psychic pressure shattered. Reality itself seemed to twist and warp, as if the very fabric of the universe was being torn apart. Vonal's consciousness screamed in protest, but her mind was no longer strong enough to resist the heart's power. The cocoon that housed Vonal's form cracked, splintering into fragments. The artifact pulsed with a violent intensity, as if it were fighting to maintain its grip on the galaxy. And then, with a final, resounding implosion, the artifact collapsed in on itself, its power fading into nothingness. For a moment, everything was still. And then, the galaxy began to breathe again. When the artifact collapsed, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, there was silence. The overwhelming psychic presence that had once pervaded the galaxy was gone. The force that had driven humanity to ascend beyond its origins, to shape and dominate the universe, had been severed. The Federation's once unstoppable march had come to a halt. Toland stood amidst the wreckage of the Nexus, the heart of the void still pulsing faintly in his hands. He had done it. He had freed the galaxy from the shackles of the artifact's control. And yet, even as he absorbed the weight of the victory, an unsettling realization began to settle in. The artifact might have been destroyed, but the consequences of its influence had already irrevocably altered the fabric of reality. The universe that Vonal had created was not easily undone. As the chamber's collapse echoed through the Nexus, the Faltari and Echoes began to retreat. They had succeeded in their mission, but now they faced a new question: what was left of the galaxy after Vonal's reign? Toland stood on the edge of a shattered city on Terra's surface, gazing out at the sky. The once thriving metropolis was now in ruins, its towering spires cracked and broken. In the distance, he could see ships descending from orbit, Echoes and Faltari who had come to witness the end of Vonal's reign. For a brief moment, there was hope. The universe, so long dominated by a single, overbearing will, was free to grow again. No longer would every planet, every civilization, be shackled by the will of a single being, a single race. There was a chance for true diversity to return, for new ideas and cultures to flourish. But Toland knew that freedom came at a steep price. Vonal had been the foundation upon which the galaxy's fragile peace had rested. Her destruction created a power vacuum, and that vacuum would be filled perhaps by something far worse than she had been. The rebellion had won, but the future was uncertain. Who would lead the galaxy now? Who would prevent chaos from overtaking the delicate balance that had once been maintained by Vonal's rule? "We have freed the galaxy, but at what cost?" Toland muttered under his breath. The last remnants of the Federation's fleet, those who had not perished during the conflict, drifted in space, now aimless, their once unified purpose dissolved. Some had lost their connection to Vonal's guiding force, and were left in a state of confusion, struggling to understand what their purpose was without her. Others were unsure if they still had a place in this new world. On Terra, as the smoke of the destroyed Nexus began to clear, a small group of humans emerged from the shadows, their faces worn but determined. There were survivors, members of Vonal's inner circle, those who had once served as the tools of her power. Now, in the aftermath, they were leaders without a cause. Their empire had crumbled, but their ambition was as alive as ever. One of them, a woman named Alara, stepped forward. Toland knew her well. She had once been a key advisor to Vonal, an expert in galactic strategy. Alara had believed in the Federation's vision, in the idea that humanity's ascension was inevitable and essential for the survival of the galaxy. She was a pragmatic woman, someone who understood the delicate balance of power. Her face was hard as stone, but there was something in her eyes, something like regret. "I can feel it," Alara said, her voice quiet but resolute. "The galaxy is already starting to fracture. Without Vamel, we have no unified vision. Humanity has no purpose but to survive. We must rebuild." Tolan looked at her carefully. "Rebuild what? Another empire? Another centralization of power? Humanity must learn from its mistakes, not repeat them." "Not all of humanity," Alara retorted sharply. "Some will always crave order, some will always seek unity. If we don't guide them, if we don't take control, others will." "You mean the remnants of the old order, the ones who still worship the artifact's power?" Tolan asked. "Not just them," she said, her eyes glinting with an unsettling determination. "There are still factions across the galaxy that crave domination. They may not have the artifact anymore, but they have the desire. And if we don't rebuild, someone else will fill the void." Tolan's mind raced as he considered her words. She was right, in a way. Power vacuums were dangerous, and without a guiding hand, chaos would rise. The Echoes and the Faltari could not govern the galaxy forever. As much as Tolan wished for a truly decentralized and diverse universe, the reality was much more complex. The galaxy was not simply going to become a utopia overnight. "We can't fall back into the old ways," Tolan said firmly. "The galaxy needs freedom, not another authoritarian regime." "And that's where we differ," Alara said with a bitter smile. "The galaxy needs order. Without it, all we've fought for will fall apart. Perhaps you think the artifact was the problem. But I think the problem was that we were too blind to see the need for structure." Tolan could feel the weight of her words. She was right in one sense. Order was essential to the survival of any society. But he knew from experience that absolute control, unchecked power, and forced unity would only lead to the same cycles of oppression and revolt. As he turned to face the city of Terra, the once proud seat of human domination, he could only wonder what the future held. A few weeks later, after the fall of the Nexus, factions began to form. While some, like the Echoes, pushed for a return to a more decentralized, self-governing galaxy, others, like Alara's faction, saw an opportunity to rebuild humanity's power structure. It was clear that a new struggle was beginning, one that could divide the galaxy even more harshly than before. The remnants of the Federation, those loyal to Vamel, began to regroup. Some wanted to restore the old order, to bring humanity back to its golden age, even if it meant forging a new path to domination. Others, however, sought a more cautious approach, understanding that humanity's unchecked power had been their undoing in the first place. They, too, feared the galaxy falling into chaos. Meanwhile, the alien factions that had once been pushed to the brink of extinction by humanity's rule began to stir. The Faltari were not the only race to have survived Vamel's purge. Across the stars, other species began to rebuild their strength, secretly preparing for the next phase of galactic politics. Some saw the destruction of Vamel as an opportunity to push back against the rise of human dominance. Others, more cautious, simply observed, unsure if the humans would collapse into chaos or rise again as something new. Tolan could feel the tension building. The galaxy had been freed, but at a steep cost. Humanity had lost its guiding force, but its old ambitions were still alive. The factions would clash, ideologies would collide, and power would shift again. In the center of Terra's ruins, Tolan stood alone for a moment, looking up at the sky. He could almost hear the echoes of the past, of all the empires, all the wars that had come before. Was this just another cycle? Would humanity fall into the same traps it had before? Or would this truly be the beginning of something different? Tolan's musings were interrupted by a faint vibration in the air, followed by a distant hum. He turned to see a new fleet of ships descending from the skies. These were not the remnants of the Federation, nor were they the forces of the Echoes or the Faltari. This fleet bore the unmistakable insignia of a new faction, one that had been quietly rising in the shadows. Humanity, it seemed, was already beginning to rebuild, but in ways that no one could predict. A new generation was coming, one that had never known the unyielding control of Vonal or the artifact. It was a generation that would define the future. The question remained, would they build something new, or would they fall into the same traps as those who had come before? Tolan knew one thing for certain: the galaxy's future was no longer set in stone. The wheel of power was turning again, and this time, no one knew where it would stop. Part 18, The Last Choice. The ships hovered above Terra, their sleek forms casting long shadows over the ruins. Tolan stared at them, knowing that whatever happened next would define the galaxy's future for centuries to come. The choice was no longer his alone. The galaxy had been freed, but it was still on the precipice of an uncertain future. Alara stepped up beside him, her expression hard but contemplative. "We've reached the end of one chapter," she said softly, "but this is where it truly begins." Tolan nodded, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. The artifact's influence was gone, and humanity was no longer the galaxy's greatest weapon, but now, that same humanity stood at the center of an entirely new struggle. Could they learn from their past? Or would they repeat it? In the distance, the fleet began to land. Among the new arrivals were leaders from several previously subjugated species, now finding themselves negotiating for their place in this new galaxy. The boundaries were not yet drawn. The lines between factions were blurry, and trust would take time to rebuild. Tolan turned to Alara. "We have a chance to create something better. But it won't be easy." She met his gaze with a faint, knowing smile. "It never is." With a deep breath, Tolan stepped forward, walking toward the fleet. The path ahead was unclear, but the galaxy had one certainty now: it was no longer defined by one person, one mind, or one will. The power had been shattered. Humanity had been forced to confront its own legacy, and in doing so, had become its own greatest hope and greatest risk. And so, the galaxy waited. Tolan's steps were slow but resolute as he moved toward the unknown. The universe had been reborn in chaos, and now it had the chance to grow again. But it would not be easy. New leaders would rise, new alliances would form, and the struggle for control would continue. The lessons of Vonal, the artifact, and all the bloodshed were not easily forgotten. Whether humanity would rise to the occasion or fall back into the same traps was yet to be seen. But one thing was clear: the galaxy would never again be the same. And as the sun set over Terra's broken skyline, casting long shadows across the ruins of the past, the stars above seemed to whisper the same truth. The future was uncertain, but it belonged to those who dared to shape it.